G'day guys, you're back with Miracle Max. In the workshop today we have a Hyundai i30 with a strange steering knock. Of course this is a common fault, but we can check it out together. This fault here is as common as tomato sauce on a meat pie with the Hyundais as well as the Kias, but we'll go through it together. Problem being is this fella here, that knocky noise, but if you start it up it's even worse. Okay, it's only a tiny little component that fails, but it's got a bit of work to pull it apart and get it sorted, so let's get into it. To replace the faulty component, a lot of people remove the entire steering column and do it on the bench. I'm going to see if I can do it in situ, or with it sitting in the vehicle without disconnecting too much. Of course, one thing it's important to realise is that you want to make sure that you're replacing the correct component. The best way to do that is to hold the bottom of the steering column itself, the shaft that comes out of that. So that guy there, you hold that, grip it tight, and then turn your steering wheel backwards and forwards like that. If you still have the knock, then obviously you've got a problem up that direction. If not, it's down that direction. More often than not, it's back that way, and it's this little component that needs replacement. But yeah, check the steering knuckle, that sort of stuff first. It could be in the steering rack, but in this particular case, it is that faulty component that I need to replace within the electronic steering motor itself. To access a lot of the goodies that we need to get to, firstly we need to remove this undercover from the steering column just to give us plenty of room to work on it. And to get that panel out, 2 Phillips head screws, one there, one over, there we go, right over there. There's actually one more thing you've got to do, not just this screw down here, but there's a screw hidden in behind here. So you've got to undo this one here, in behind the fuse panel cover, that bloke there. And undo that one, then this pops out, and then there should be some screws under here, I believe. Yeah, a little more involved than I first thought. And there he is, this little guy right here. This fella down here comes out through the fuse panel itself, so you can access that first, pop that panel off, then you've got to get this guy off to get this panel off. It's the starting point, yay. Once that's down, we simply disconnect these 2 connectors here off the back of our, what do we got, ESP off switch and our dimmer switch, and we should be able to just push them in, get them out of the road, and then it should fall on the ground. I said it should fall on the ground, like that. We might have to get the DLC connector out, which involves pushing back on these little tabs here and here, and that should slide backwards and get that out so we can put this panel completely on the workbench out of the road. Okay, next step. From what I can see, the easiest way to do this is going to be to pull off the steering wheel and take the shroud off. The reason being is tucked in behind there, as you can see, is a screw holding in the shroud. Now, we don't want to break anything, of course. I could possibly, at a stretch, get to the bolts that I need to drop the column down, but I don't think that that's going to be an easy way, especially trying to show you guys. So we need to de-energize the airbag system, so pull out some fuses and wait the appropriate amount of time. We're probably looking at 10 minutes or so, just to let that airbag or those airbag capacitors dissipate, and then we can pull that airbag off. That guy right there. According to auto data here, you can see how to disarm the system. We need to turn off the ignition, remove the ignition key, disconnect the battery leads, and wait 3 minutes before you start work on it. Let's do that. But because I don't want to lose all my clock settings and my radio settings, I've gone to this site called Fusebox Info, and it has an array of fuse and relay locations. Really good. So this one here, if I scroll down, what I'm going to do is find out my appropriate one. I've got a 2009 model. 2009 model right there. If we scroll down, I'm going to take out anything related to airbag, fuse, etc., and that should in turn make it nice and safe for me. Scroll down, airbag, there we go, there's one I've got to pull out. So etc., pull them out, leave them out while you're doing your work, it's not going to hurt anything, and then continue on with your repair. That way you don't lose any clock settings or radio settings. I found 2 airbag fuses in the cabin. One here is a 15 ampere and down here is a 10 ampere. Of course you need to check your own. Don't take my word for it. My vehicle might be different to yours. In the engine bay there's two, or there's one located over here, number 13, but it's a little bit difficult to ascertain which is which, so I've pulled both. It appears to be these ones here, so I've pulled out both of those ones just to be sure. Wasn't sure which one was which. They're not labelled with any sort of number or anything. So I pulled out those. I'm going to wait my allotted time and get into it. And we're looking at a T40 Torx bit to go into our airbag securing bolts back here. We'll get those undone next. One little trick to note is as you are undoing those two bolts, those two Torx bolts there and there, make sure you keep tension behind this with your hand so that you can pull it forward. Otherwise you'll end up just unscrewing and nothing will happen, because the bolts that go into a cage nut have a little extended piece on them, and unless you put tension on them they just won't come undone. So yeah, just pull on that and the bolts will come out and then this will come off. Don't forget to undo your clock spring, your airbag, all that sort of gizmo, horn, etc. that are attached to the back. Getting the horn connector off is no big deal. Of course you've got this little connector over here that you need to release the wires from. The airbag connector, however, has a little locking tab that you need to lift up on. If we can get under that, just pull him up like that and that should come out like that. Okay, so treat this airbag with respect. You always face it up that way. You never face it down. That's dangerous like that. If it goes off, the airbag goes up that way. If it goes off like that, you've got a metal rocket on the back of it and it's just been launched by an airbag. Face it up that way. Okay, next this nut needs to come off right here, and it is a 22mm nut that we undo. Then we need to mark this so that we don't lose the orientation of the steering wheel itself in relation to the steering column. You can see there's a little tiny dot on the steering wheel itself, and I've just put a scratch on my column right here. Not sure if you can see it or not, but that lines up so that I can put it back together knowing that it's lined up perfectly. Won't have to change the position of it at all. Easy way to get the steering wheel off is to put your knees behind the steering wheel like that, grab the top of it and go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Wiggle up and down with your knees in comparison to pulling in theory, and in theory it should come off. Sometimes you've got to get a little more excited with that, but it'll come off. You can also use a puller in between these two bolts here, and that goes across there. I don't have one at the moment, but it should come off. I've never had trouble getting a steering wheel off yet, just using the old knee and yankaroo on the top there. It should come off no probs. There you go, no probs, came off easy. I just couldn't do it one-handed hanging onto a camera. One thing you need to be aware of is that bloke back there, the clock spring connector. Don't turn it around because that is set in a centered position that will line up with your steering wheel and column, etc. So make sure you pull that off carefully and put your steering wheel back in exactly the same position, and it should line up nicely. So all that work was done, yep, just to get to these two screws here. Once I undo those, I should be able to pull my column shroud down and the top section off. That'll give us a little more access to be able to drop the column, to give us easier access to that motor. Some people can do it around the top of it. It's too hard for me. I'm old and crusty. So undo those two and we can drop it down. Just when you thought you've got it sorted, there's always one tricksy hiding one, isn't there? There he is underneath the column. So yeah, undo that Phillips head. She should pull apart nicely. Okay, and now we have access to the actual bolts that hold the column in place. That bloke there and that bloke over there. So we can drop those. I think they might be a 12 or 13 mil. Might need a deep socket to get to those guys, but that should drop the column down far enough for us to access the motor. With those two nuts removed, the column is still being held in place. That's because there's another two bolts back here. It's a little bit hard to see. Let's go for a deep dive. Hang on, folks. Let's go in behind there. I don't know if you can see it or not. Yeah, there's a couple of bolts there. They're the guys that we need to undo. One there and one on the other side, of course. So we'll drop that. You may want to put your seat forward and rest the entire column on your seat, just so it doesn't drop down, make a big mess. I didn't end up putting it on the seat because it doesn't drop down far enough and the seat would actually be in the road. So a couple of things I have done is try and take some tension off some of these wires. I've undone this little clip here that goes through this hole, and on the motor itself I've taken off this control wire as well as the power and ground, those big wires there. Make sure you take a photo first so that they go back in the correct hole. I assume that they only go one way, but just in case. So anything that has a lot of tension on it, make sure that you can undo that and get it out the road so that you can drop this motor off right over here. They're Torx bits by the looks of things. Dude, these things were super tight. These guys over here, they're actually a T25, and they were super tight. One of them I was getting ready to strip out, so I tightened it first. You always tighten it first to undo it, believe it or not. When it goes click, then you can undo it quite easily. Trick for young players there. So I've loosened all of them, but yeah, mate, they were super tight. So even though I managed to get those 4 bolts off here, the motor itself, there's a lip in place, or being held in place by this ECU here. So I've had to drop this ECU, or I'm just dropping it down a touch so that I can slide this motor backwards. Good on you, Hyundai, great idea, mate. This one has 1, 2, 3 bolts holding it in place, I think, and if I just loosen them off, it should be able to wiggle down. There we go, it's dropped in place, and we should be able to sneak our motor back that way. Okay, I was completely wrong. This little ECU, obviously the power steering electronic control module, does need to be removed, but have no fear. I did disconnect those connectors before, no big deal, but this actually goes into the back of the motor, as we can see up here, and therefore you've got to remove that to get the motor that away. And just to make things even more funner, this little connector, or the wiring harness, whatever you want to call it, has to be slid off of here, and it's actually held in place, so you've got to get a sort of a screwdriver that side and that side to force it backwards. Of course, this would be for things like angle sensor, torque sensor, those sort of things as well. So just be careful with this, but that just slides off of that little ledge there. So fair bit to get this motor out after all, hey? Okay, so this is the part that fails. It's a little gearish plastic looking thing. Don't want to twist that around too much. Maybe we go the other way. There we go. And that there is pretty much for snookered. That would explain all the noise, etc. We don't want to pull that out. I'll show you what it should look like as a new piece. A little bit different, hey? That's the new piece. That's the, well, nothing piece left really, so I need to dig that out so I can slide that into place, and then that goes into the steering column as well. Have to clean all that out too. It's tucked away. I can't really get my camera in there for you guys, so you'll just have to take my word for it. It's tucked away in there. Okay, time to clean it out, put the new piece in. So I've pulled them out of the vehicle, or pulled this one out of the vehicle, and as you can see, they're not really overly happy, are they? I've got a lot of cleaning up to do as mentioned, but I'm going to blow out some of that with compressed air as well, because it's just powdered. I've got to get it out of there, otherwise it's going to damage my new one. So that's sort of where it goes into the steering column itself, and you can see all the powdered dust that's in there. That there is the motor. I've cleaned it up as best as I can. Time for the air compressor. Now that I've got it cleaned up nicely, blew out with compressed air, this little guy just goes in there. A bit hard one-handed, of course, and that has to fit in between those little veins, I guess you could say, the little pointy bits sticking out, and then the other side there and there, etc., has to go into the steering column. So you've got to mesh them in correctly to make sure that it works properly. When you're putting this motor back into place, it's really important that you make sure that it's seated correctly. Way to do that is just put these screws in, or the Torx bit screws, by hand. They should just pull in quite nicely. But you will find some resistance because there's a big spring and a brass bush in there that forces against the motor. But just make sure that it pulls in nicely. You should be able to use your Torx bit or whatever to pull it in manually. You know, you shouldn't have to put much pressure on it. It just should wind in like that. I did that with all 4. They pulled in nicely, and they're now tight. I'm ready to put my little ECU back into place. And then I've just got the steering column held in by one nut at the moment just to keep it up for me and keep it out of the road so I can put this ECU into place, and then we can put all our wiring and yada 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 back into place. Now when you put your EPS module, that's this bloke here, back into place, remember it's got to go into those connectors. You want to make sure that this thing is nice and square. You don't want to put it in cockeyed and mess up any of your connectors or terminals. So push it straight back into place and make sure that those screws are done up evenly. You should be able to push the EPS module into place even before you put the screws in, and it should go pretty much flush against the body there, and then you know that you haven't you haven't got it cockeyed or anything. It's nice and square. Should be all honky-dory. Okay, put the 2 bolts back that way and 2 nuts up this way to hold the steering column in place. One thing I did notice, I'll let you in on a little secret. Just on the bottom of the column, there's a little tang there, and the column itself has to slide under that and then put your bolts in place, otherwise it won't go in. So just this little holdy thing, that's the technical term, to hold the steering column while it's put into place. So now I can put my shroud back into place, my steering wheel, and of course the airbag goes on next, and then all the goodies over this side, you know, my covers and any electrical connectors, etc., including my diagnostic link connector that goes into place. Pop him all back together. Hopefully we've got it sorted. Of course, once you've done all that work, don't forget to put those fuses back in, both in the cabin area as well as the engine bay, the airbag fuses. Make sure they all go back. All back together now, so hopefully we got it sorted. One thing I did forget was these 2 little guys down here. They need to be connected in the back, of course, so don't forget those. So have we sorted the issue or not? Let's give it a wiggle. Nice and quiet, let's start it up. Nice and quiet. Okay, let's take it for a road test and make sure that it's all okay. Okay, when I start the engine, my ESP off light stays on. Regardless of what I do to my button over here, it stays on. One method you can use is to turn the steering wheel from lock to lock. Back to centre. Turn the ignition to the off position. Turn it on again. And it stays on. Okay, might have to get the scan tool onto that. Or sometimes you can get rid of this little sucker simply by driving it. It needs to reset. I might bring out the G-scan and just see if there's any issues. We've got a few fault codes that have come up, all power steering or airbag related, that may just need a reset on them. I'll have a look. There we go. Steering angle sensor might need to be reset. I understand that, that's fine. Our ESP, sorry, come on. Steering angle sensor. So I might need to do a reset on the steering angle sensor. Battery voltage low. That might be because I pulled the fuses. So that's a history one, of course. That might have been there originally. So I shall go through and do a steering angle reset on it and see how we go. So to recalibrate this here system, we go into steering angle sensor calibration. It says what we need to do. The warning lamp is on. We want to recalibrate it. Engine off, ignition system on. We get that one, we OK it, and we press OK. Turn the steering wheel until the message is changed. Well, let's turn our steering wheel. It's a little bit hard. Don't appear to be doing much. Oh, there we go. Second stage. Turn the steering wheel to straight ahead position. That's about straight ahead position, and we OK that. Initialization is complete. Turn the ignition key off, wait for 15 seconds, turn it on, and then check that our steering angle is within that range. And if we have a look on our dash there, our little ESP off light is gone, and if I press the button, it comes on, it goes off, it comes on, it comes off. Okay, all right, so it was merely just a steering angle recalibration. Some of those will do it if you drive the vehicle. Don't know in this case, I've had the G-scan in front of me, so that's what I've done. But the only other option, if you don't have a bi-directional scan tool, is to drive it and see if that little light goes out. Time for a road test. After a successful road test, that knock has gone, but one thing I have noticed is that he's got a suspension knock elsewhere and his handbrake needs adjustment. A few things that I've noted just taking it for a quick road test. He's not a regular customer, so these are some of the things I need to make sure that he's aware of. I hope you're able to get something from the video today, guys, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, give it a like and feel free to comment down below. Don't forget about that notification bell. You don't want to miss any future videos. Of course, hit us up on Instagram and Facebook as well. Keep in contact with us. So guys, until next time, this is Miracle Mac signing off. I will catch you later.